Paul sabotaged the brakes on my car before I was supposed to leave town. He was hoping I would disappear so he could be free with his other woman. But because I was suspicious, I secretly swapped my car with his mistress's. When he heard the news of the fiery crash on the highway, he was so drunk on the thought of his freedom that he didn't see who was really inside. Before we get into today's story, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Are you in New York, Chicago? Or tuning in from out of the country? I wish health and blessings to everyone who has liked and subscribed to the channel. Paul and I once had a marriage that was as warm as a home, a shelter that always brought comfort to my heart. I believed that as long as I was with Paul, everything in life would be okay. 8 years is not a short time. We built everything from scratch, from a tiny, rented apartment with a roof that leaked every time it rained, to the moment we had a modest little house we had once only dreamed of before falling asleep. Paul was once a man who loved me very much. He never forgot to bring home my favorite snack when he came back from work. He knew my little habits. He knew I couldn't sleep without a nightlight on. He knew I was always scared when there was a loud thunderstorm. And whenever I was worried, he would take my hand and say, "As long as we're together, you have nothing to fear." Those words gave me a sense of security. The change didn't happen overnight. It came gradually, almost imperceptibly, like tiny cracks in a wall that are invisible at first but eventually become so large, they can no longer be ignored. Paul started coming home later than usual. "There's a lot of work," he'd say, "the targets at the office have increased, and new projects require overtime." I tried to believe him. I always wanted to be an understanding, undemanding wife. But something was different. It wasn't just his hours that changed, but the way he looked at me. His gaze, once full of warmth, now seemed to just skim over me, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. He was often busy with his phone, even during dinner. That little screen seemed more absorbing than our conversations. If a message came in, he would smile slightly, a smile he no longer offered me. I tried to push my suspicions away. I told myself that maybe I was being oversensitive, that maybe this was just a phase. Every relationship goes through a period of staleness. Who doesn't say that? But a woman's intuition is rarely wrong. One night, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the living room table. The screen lit up. A woman's name appeared. A name I had never heard before. My heart started pounding. I didn't answer it right away. I just stood there and stared at the screen until the call ended. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I knew that one small step would change everything. When Paul came out of the bathroom, he looked normal, even smiling, but when he saw the phone, his expression flickered for a fraction of a second, just for a moment. Then his calm mask was back in place. "Who called?" I asked quietly. "A coworker," he replied curtly. He didn't look at me when he answered. From that night on, my heart never knew peace. I started paying attention to the small things I had previously ignored. The scent of a different perfume on his shirt, the messages he would delete as soon as I got close, the smile that would appear on his lips when he was reading something, only to vanish when he noticed me looking. I hated feeling like an amateur detective wife, filled with suspicion and uncertainty. I tried to push away my doubts until one night I heard something I was never supposed to hear. That night, I woke up thirsty. The house was dark and quiet. As I walked to the kitchen, I saw a light on in the small study at the end of the hall. The door wasn't completely closed. Through the crack, I heard Paul's soft voice. His tone was gentle, different from his usual tone. I stopped. I couldn't hear everything he was saying, but one sentence came through very clearly. "Just a little longer. This will all be over soon." His voice sounded like a promise. A promise not meant for me. Something tightened in my chest. I went back to our room, not daring to look again. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and prayed to God. What had I done wrong? Was I not patient enough? Did I not care for him enough? Or had his heart simply turned away? The next day, Paul acted as if nothing had happened. He even offered to drive me to the office. His sweet behavior made me feel even more uneasy. He was hiding something behind this sudden attentiveness. A week later, I received news from my office that I needed to go on a 2-day business trip for an important meeting. It was a big opportunity for a project I had been working on for a long time. When I shared the news, Paul seemed to go silent for a moment, then he smiled. "That's great. You really deserve this chance," he said, but again, there was something in his eyes I couldn't read. The evening before my trip, he suddenly said he would check the car I was supposed to drive. "I don't want anything to happen to you on the road," he said. I nodded, grateful for his concern, but when I saw him standing in the garage for a long time, a serious expression on his face as he stared at something. That strange feeling returned. I tried to chase away the negative thoughts, but my heart kept screaming quietly. Something was wrong. I didn't know then that these small suspicions I had been harboring for so long would soon turn into a massive storm that would destroy everything. And I also didn't know that the nights of prayer I offered to God would become the only light when my life began to crumble from a betrayal I had never imagined. This chapter isn't about the end. It's about the beginning of the cracks that I could no longer patch up with patience alone. And deep in my heart, I began to realize the most painful thing of all. The man who had promised to protect me might be planning a life without me. The invitation to the meeting came at a strange time, as if life was deliberately giving me an out just as my heart was tight with suspicion. The office was sending me to an important meeting out of town. The project I had worked on for so long had finally caught the attention of the board. If all went well, there was a good chance of a promotion. Once, news like this would have been a reason for a small celebration over dinner with Paul. He would have hugged me with pride and said he knew I could do it. But now, his reaction was different. He smiled, congratulated me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's good. An opportunity like this is rare," he said quietly. I nodded, trying to read something from his expression. There was a brief silence before he continued with a question. "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning." He paused for a few seconds. Too long for a normal response. "All right. I'll check your car tonight. I don't want anything to happen to you on the road." Those words sounded normal. A husband's concern. But I didn't know why there was a tone in them that made my chest feel tight. That evening, after a dinner that felt heavy with sparse conversation, Paul went out to the garage. Through the living room window, I could see his silhouette moving in the dim light. He opened the hood of the car. He took a long time. Every so often, he would lean in, as if looking at something intensely. I stood behind the curtain, watching quietly. My heart began to race again with unease. Why was he only paying attention to my car now, when he had rarely touched it before? For the past few months, I was usually the one who took it for regular maintenance. He was always busy. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I was just being too suspicious. Maybe the unease that hadn't yet passed was making me see normal things with suspicion. But that night, my gut feeling was stronger than ever. When Paul came back inside, his expression was very calm. Too calm. "It's safe. Everything's fine," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. I nodded. "Thank you." He just gave a slight smile and went into the bedroom, without hugging me or kissing my forehead like he used to. Every time I got out of bed, I would look back at him. His back was turned to me. The distance between us felt vast, even though we were only inches apart. I remembered the conversation from the other night. The sentence I had accidentally overheard. "Just a little longer. This will all be over soon." What did he mean? Over. In what way? I closed my eyes. I tried to pray in my mind. I asked God for guidance and for peace, but what came was even greater anxiety. 2 in the morning. I woke up again. I didn't know if it was from a dream, or from a mind that wouldn't stop thinking. I slowly sat up and saw Paul sleeping beside me. His face was so peaceful, with no sign of someone hiding something. I got out of bed and slowly walked to the living room, not really knowing what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I stood in front of the window overlooking the garage. My car was parked as usual, quiet, unmoving. It seemed like nothing was wrong, but inside, there was a voice urging me on. Check it thoroughly, before it's too late." I almost went outside, but I stopped myself. If I went out now, what would I do? I'm not a mechanic. I wouldn't know what to look for. I went back and sat on the couch. I hugged my knees. For the first time in our marriage, I was afraid of the possibility that I couldn't see clearly. Morning came too quickly. Paul was more energetic than usual. He even made breakfast, something he rarely did lately. "I want your trip to go smoothly," he said, placing a plate of food in front of me. The sound of a spoon hitting the plate was louder than usual, because we were both silent. He walked me to the front of the house. He held my shoulders as I prepared to get in the car. "Be careful." His gaze was deep. I didn't know if it was a look of concern or something else. I got in the car. The door slowly closed. I gripped the steering wheel. My heart was beating faster than ever. Before starting the engine, I looked back at Paul, who was still standing on the porch. He waved. For a split second, I saw a smile I couldn't understand. It wasn't a smile of pride, nor a smile of sadness. It was like someone waiting for something to happen. I swallowed hard. Suddenly, I didn't turn the key. The feeling came again, stronger than before. I opened the door again and pretended I had forgotten something. Just a moment. I forgot my documents. Paul was slightly surprised, but he nodded immediately. Oh, then go get them. I went back into the house, but not to get any documents. I stood in the living room, trying to think clearly. If this was all just my suspicion, I would look like a fool, but if it wasn't, I might be on the verge of something much darker. I made a decision. I wouldn't leave right away. I would investigate this first. That day was the turning point where my trust was truly tested, not just in Paul, but also in myself. And before I knew it, that small decision not to leave that morning changed the course of our lives forever. The decision not to leave immediately wasn't a sudden impulse. It came from a feeling I had long suppressed. A feeling that had been knocking quietly in my chest, demanding to be seen. I went back into the room, pretending to look for documents. My hands were shaking, not from fear of something certain, but from fear of a possibility that had never existed before. Paul was in the kitchen when I came out. Did you find your documents? He asked. Yes, I replied briefly. I looked at his face for longer than usual, searching for a crack, for a sign of unease, but he looked very calm. Too calm. All right, be safe on the road, he said again. Finally, I got in the car and started the engine. However, I didn't drive straight to the main road leading out of town. I only drove around the neighborhood and parked in a quiet corner, out of sight from the house. I turned off the engine. I felt a heaviness. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. But I was sure of one thing. If I left without checking anything, I would never find peace. A few minutes later, I saw the front door of the house open. From a distance, Paul's figure quickly appeared. He looked in the direction of the road I had just taken, then went back inside. My heart trembled. Why was he acting as if he was certain I had already left? A minute later, he came out again. This time, he was holding his phone. He talked on the porch for a long time, pacing back and forth. His face looked tense. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his expression was enough to convince me that he was waiting for something. After the call, he went back inside and didn't come out again. I was still sitting in the car. I had mixed feelings of anger, sadness, and fear. If something was planned, it was possibly happening right now. I looked at the steering wheel. Suddenly, the car I used every day felt like a stranger. My mind went back to the night before, remembering how Paul had inspected the car for so long with a look I couldn't understand. Without thinking any longer, I got out of the car and opened the hood. I'm not a mechanic. I only know the basics. Everything seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary. But this made me feel even more uneasy, because if something had been done intentionally, it wouldn't be something an ordinary person like me could easily spot. I slowly closed the hood. In this situation, I hoped it was all just a misunderstanding. I would rather be a suspicious wife than a wife who has to face a bitter truth, but my gut feeling had never been this strong. I took out my phone and reopened an old message I had glimpsed a few days earlier from that woman. The words that made me catch my breath. When will this all finally be over? I don't want to hide anymore. Paul's short reply. Be patient. It won't be long now. Those words echoed in my mind again. It won't be long now. Where would it not be long? I closed my eyes, praying silently to God for the courage to face whatever was coming. Then, my hands moved quietly. I called someone who had been quietly observing the changes in our family for a long time. He was the only person who knew about my suspicions, and he was also the person who had accidentally seen Paul with that woman at a cafe several times. His voice was full of concern when he answered. Did you leave? Not yet, I answered quietly. I need your help. A few hours later, a simple plan began to take shape, but it was a brilliant plan. If there was something wrong with this car, I wasn't going to be the one driving it. I carefully returned to the house and realized Paul was gone. His car wasn't in the garage. The house was quiet, too quiet. I stood for a few seconds in the living room, looking at the wall that once echoed with our laughter. I felt like I was in a foreign place. With the help of the person I trusted, the car I was supposed to drive was no longer in its place. The switch happened very quickly and quietly. Not to hurt anyone, but simply to let the truth reveal itself. When everything was done, I stood looking at the yard with mixed feelings. If my suspicions were wrong, I had gone too far. But if they were right, perhaps today was the day the final mask would be removed. That night, I didn't leave town. I drove straight to my parents' house without telling Paul. I told my office that my trip was delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. On the way, my mind wouldn't stop working. I didn't want to repay evil with evil. I just wanted to know how far a man who once swore fidelity could go for his own freedom. It was starting to get dark when my phone vibrated. Paul's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "Have you arrived yet?" he asked quickly. "Not yet. Still a long way to go," I replied in a calm tone. There was a moment of silence on the other end. A silence that felt strange. "Oh, all right. Be safe," he said briefly, then hung up. His voice sounded anxious. I looked up at the night sky through the car window. I felt a heaviness. It felt like something was waiting for me that I couldn't avoid. And deep in my heart, I knew that the decision to remain silent and not accuse him right away was the most painful one, because silence meant giving the truth time to reveal itself. And the only thing I could rely on was the hope that when the truth came, I would still be strong enough to accept it. That night felt longer than usual. I was in my old room at my parents' house. The room that had witnessed my dreams before I got married. The walls were still the same soft color. The wooden wardrobe still creaked every time it was opened. Everything seemed the same except for me. I was no longer the same hopeful woman. I was a wife waiting for the truth to be revealed. Since the afternoon, the phone had not left my hand. I didn't know what news I was waiting for. Maybe for news that everything was fine. Or maybe for news that would confirm my gut feeling. Every time the screen lit up with a simple notification, my heart rate would spike, but they were all unimportant messages. Until finally, just before midnight, the phone didn't exactly ring for me, but for Paul. I knew this because a few minutes earlier, he had sent me a short message. "Where are you?" I replied calmly, "Still on the road." Then there was no reply. Around 11:00 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Paul. His voice was completely different. His breath was ragged. "Where are you?" he asked quickly. I was silent for a moment before answering. "Still on the road." "Why?" On the other end, I heard another voice, like someone speaking loudly but unclearly. Then Paul said slowly, almost whispering to himself, "That's impossible." My heart immediately trembled. "What happened?" I asked, trying to remain calm. He didn't answer right away. Those few short seconds felt like an eternity. "There's been an accident on the highway," he finally said. "Your car." That sentence hung in the air. I closed my eyes for a moment. I had been waiting for this. "What kind of accident?" I asked quietly. Paul's voice changed. At first, it sounded like panic, but then, strangely, a note of relief crept in. "The accident was very serious," he said. He paused again. I could picture his face earlier. Maybe pale, maybe confused, or maybe hiding something deeper. And when he thought I was in the car, there was something he couldn't hide. A tone of relief. I heard it very quietly, but clearly enough to shatter what was left of my trust. Then, another voice came through more clearly from his side. It seemed someone was providing more information. Paul suddenly fell silent for a very long time. "What does that mean?" he said. His voice changed. My heart was pounding. This was the moment. I heard him speak again. This time, his voice was filled with pure disbelief. "No, that's not her." There was a long silence. Then I heard his heavy breathing. "What's her name?" he asked quietly. Finally, a name was spoken. The name of the woman who had been quietly present in our marriage for a long time. I didn't hear it clearly over the phone, but Paul's reaction was answer enough. His phone probably almost fell from his hand. "How did this happen?" he said softly. His hands must have been shaking. I let him sink into his confusion for a few seconds before I finally spoke. Paul seemed surprised to hear my voice still on the line. "I wasn't in that car." Silence, a very deep silence. He was no longer tense because of the accident, but because of something else, fear. "I didn't leave this morning," I said slowly. "I'm at my parents' house." There was no reply from the other end, only increasingly rapid, deep breaths. I could imagine his mind racing. Trying to piece together a plan that had fallen apart, trying to understand why everything had gone wrong, why someone else was in the car, why the name mentioned wasn't mine. "Paul," I added quietly. "You sounded relieved just now." He immediately cut me off. I was just surprised, but his voice was trembling, and I knew him long enough to know when he was lying. That night, the truth didn't come in the form of a confession. It came in the form of a reaction. The reaction of a man who thought his plan had succeeded, the reaction of a husband who felt the weight of his life had been lifted. And that reaction turned to fear when he learned that the truth had not unfolded as he had expected. "What's the situation?" I asked again, this time with a firmer tone. He didn't answer right away. "It's very serious," he finally said. The car is severely damaged. He didn't mention any other details. He didn't mention the woman's condition. He also didn't express his true feelings. But I knew that tonight was not just about a car accident. It was the night the mask began to crack. And behind those cracks, I saw a side of Paul I never wanted to see. I was the first one to answer the phone. My hands were cold, but my mind felt very clear. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat quietly on the edge of the bed. I realized what hurt the most. If I had really left this morning, without listening to my gut feeling, the name mentioned that night would probably have been mine. And that night, for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel betrayed, but hunted. After the call ended, the night became even quieter. I sat still for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because finally, all the loose pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place in my mind. My gut feeling was not wrong. It wasn't just my wife's suspicion that my concerns were too sensitive. There was definitely a plan. And that night, that plan failed. About half an hour later, my phone rang again. It was Paul again. This time, his voice was very different. The tone of relief was gone. All I could feel was an anxiety he was trying to hide. "Is it true you didn't leave this morning?" he asked gently. I didn't answer. "I wasn't feeling well, so I postponed the trip," I said calmly. He fell silent. "Who was using the car?" he continued. That question almost made me smile bitterly. Shouldn't I be the one asking that question? "I don't know," I said slowly. "Don't you know better?" Silence again. Paul seemed to have nothing more to say. I heard him take a deep breath, then exhale heavily. He said he was at the scene. The police investigation was still ongoing. Many witnesses were being questioned. I listened to him without interrupting. I let him talk. The more he talked, the more he showed his uncontrolled anxiety. "You know," he said suddenly. "It seems the brakes weren't working properly." That sentence hung in the air. I felt something hard hit my chest. So, it was true. It wasn't just my feelings deceiving me. I held back an immediate reaction. "Really?" I replied quietly. He didn't notice the change in my voice. Or maybe he was too preoccupied with his own fear? "How did someone else end up using that car?" he continued, as if talking to himself. That question was directed at me. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. "Maybe because not every plan goes as expected." He fell silent again. This time, the silence was longer. I imagined his face in the dim light of the streetlights. Maybe he was sitting on a curb or standing, looking at the wrecked car. Maybe he was just trying to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the one in the accident. And maybe for the first time, he was afraid of his own shadow. "I'll be home tonight," he finally said. "Okay," I replied briefly. The call was disconnected. I looked at the phone screen, which was now black. I felt like I was witnessing the end of something I had once fought so hard for. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, not from anxiety, but from a painful awareness. If there was indeed an element of premeditation in all of this, then the man who had slept next to me for so long had gambled my life for his own freedom. I tried to remember the year we got married. All the laughter, all the tears, all the arguments. Was it all meant to lead to a tragedy at the end of this story from the very beginning? Before the day passed quickly, I finally managed to sleep for a short while, but not long after, I was woken up by a news notification on my phone. The highway accident from last night was starting to be briefly reported. Not many details were given, just general information about an accident that was likely caused by a brake system failure. I quickly turned off the screen. That morning, as the sun rose, another message came from Paul. "I'm home." Just 2 words. No explanation, no extra messages, no questions about my condition. I knew he was waiting for me to ask, but today, I chose silence. A few hours later, I finally returned home. When I opened the door, it felt different. Colder, heavier. Paul was sitting in the living room. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. I didn't know if it was from lack of sleep, or something else. When he saw me come in, he immediately stood up. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm fine." He seemed to let out a breath of relief. A relief he could no longer hide, but behind that relief was a clear fear. We sat opposite each other. There was no more room for pretense. Paul seemed to want to say something but couldn't get the words out. I was the one who spoke first. "Last night, you were relieved when you heard about the accident." He immediately shook his head. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I asked quietly. He lowered his head. His hands were clasped tightly. I don't know how to explain it. It was the first time he had told the truth. He really didn't know how to explain it, because no explanation could replace the relief he felt thinking his wife might be in danger. I slowly stood up. 8 years, Paul. I trusted you for 8 years. My voice wasn't loud. It was very calm, and maybe that scared him even more. He raised his face, pale. For the first time, I saw a man who had lost control of his own plan. His face no longer held a confident expression. There were no more secrets either. All that was left was a guilt that was beginning to build. I then realized that the mask had completely fallen off. The room felt tight, even though its dimensions hadn't changed. I stood there while Paul sat, his shoulders seeming heavier than before. No quick defense came. No short answers trying to smooth things over came from his mouth. There was only silence, and silence is often more truthful than 1,000 words. Paul slowly raised his face. His eyes were red not just from lack of sleep, but from something deeper. I never thought I would be in this situation, he said quietly. That sentence sounded weak, fragile, but for me, it wasn't an answer. To what extent? I asked calmly. He fell silent again. I could see the internal struggle between admitting everything and continuing to hide behind a lie too complicated to fix. I already knew about her, I continued, speaking about the other woman without raising my voice. About your plan for a life without me. Paul buried his face in his hands. I just wanted it to end cleanly, he said softly. Cleanly. I almost laughed. But what came out was a long, heavy breath. Cleanly, but the silence was answer enough. I remembered the message I had once seen. That short sentence was now like a knife. It won't be long now, so that was it. He didn't have to explain in detail what he did or what he planned. His expression said it all. His fear revealed everything. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to hear how or when it started, because in the end, one truth was clear. He was willing to lose me not because he no longer loved me, but because he wanted to be free from the responsibility he had once promised to bear. Anna, he said quietly. I didn't think all this would happen. I looked at him for a long time. What you didn't anticipate was that I didn't leave that night, I replied. That sentence made him turn pale. He finally realized it wasn't fate that ruined his plan, but my decision. I don't want revenge, I continued. I just wanted to know the truth, and now I do. Paul slowly stood up. He looked like he wanted to come closer but hesitated. I made a mistake, he said. A word so small compared to its consequences. A mistake doesn't start in one day, I replied. It's born from small lies. It's nurtured. I walked to the window. I looked at the yard in front of the house, which was once full of hope. Now it looked like a foreign place. 8 years, Paul. I never asked for anything more than honesty and faithfulness. He didn't interrupt me. And the worst part is, it wasn't just about another woman, I continued quietly, it was about how you felt your life would be better without me. Finally, the tears came, not a loud sob, but a slow stream of tears that washed away the last remnants of trust. Paul sat down. He now looked completely broken. But not because I was completely gone, but because he realized his plan had turned into a disaster. The woman he had chosen for his future was no longer by his side. Not because she left him, but because fate had decided otherwise, and he had to face it all. Alone. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel happiness either. I just felt tired. Tired of defending someone who, in the cruelest way, wanted to get rid of me. That day, I made the decision I had long put off. I left, not just out of anger, but because my dignity was too important. I didn't want to risk anything more. I didn't want to live with someone who had ever thought of a life without me in that way. Paul tried to stop me. Give me a chance, he said, his voice trembling. I turned back. You already had your chance. 8 years. He didn't argue. I went into the room, hastily grabbing a few clothes and important documents. Every step was heavy, but strangely light, as if a huge weight had finally been lifted. Despite the pain, before I left that house, I stopped for a moment at the door. I don't hate you, I said quietly, but I can't stay here anymore. He stood there, helpless, and for the first time, I saw a man who had lost absolutely everything. Not because someone took it from him, but because he had thrown it away himself. The sky that day was blue, unlike my heart, which was still cloudy. But deep down, I knew one thing. The truth hurts, but living in a lie is far more destructive. The days after I left that house felt quiet. Not quiet due to a lack of noise, but quiet due to the absence of the person who was once a part of my daily life. No more 2 cups of coffee every morning. No more small talks before bed. For a while, I stayed with my parents. They didn't ask many questions. They just hugged me for longer than usual. And sometimes, a hug without questions is more comforting than a long piece of advice. The first few weeks were the hardest. Not because I missed Paul, my husband, but because I missed the past version of myself, the version of me who trusted completely. The version of me who never imagined that the person she loved could plan a life without her in such a way. Every night, I would talk quietly to God, no longer asking for answers, but for the strength to accept the truth. I learned something important. Betrayal isn't just about the presence of a third person. Betrayal is when someone decides to sacrifice the safety and trust of the person they love for their own convenience. And that is far deeper than simple infidelity. Paul tried to call me many times. His messages were long, filled with regret. He said, "My life has fallen apart." He said, "Nothing went according to plan." Those words only brought a bitter smile to my face. Nothing went according to plan because plans built on lies rarely end in success. How could they? I didn't reply to any of his messages. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I knew I needed distance for my wounds to heal. One day, I heard that Paul had decided to move. He sold the house and started living somewhere else. Maybe to escape the memories. Maybe to escape the guilt. I didn't want to know the details. I just knew I didn't want to live in a life built on secrets. Gradually, I refocused on my work. The project that had been put on hold finally moved forward. My colleagues welcomed me back, not asking too many questions, just treating me like a woman trying to rebuild her career. And every time I successfully completed a task, I felt a little stronger. I was slowly finding the self I had lost. I learned that love should never make someone feel threatened. It should never make someone feel they have to lose for the other person to be happy. If a relationship makes you feel like your existence is a burden, then perhaps the thing to let go of is not just that person, but also the fear of starting over. Now, when I look back, I don't just see the pain, I see the lessons. I learned to listen to my intuition. I realized that silence doesn't mean weakness. I realized that the truth, no matter how bitter, is better than a lie that sounds sweet. And most of all, I realized that dignity is not something to be sacrificed. Paul lost a lot in one night, but what I lost was less important. I lost my trust, but behind that loss, I found courage. The courage to say enough, the courage to walk away, the courage to choose myself. Life doesn't always give us a partner who will be faithful to the end, but life always gives us a chance to rise again after a betrayal. And now, I don't stand here as a victim. I stand here as a woman who was almost taken away, but who chose to stay and walk away before everything disappeared. The most painful lesson in my life wasn't about how a person can change, but about what I finally understood I deserve. Love without having to bargain for it. And from that moment on, I promised myself, no one will be able to plan a life without me, unless I am the one choosing my own path. Sometimes the person we trust the most is the one who hurts us the deepest, but from this betrayal, I learned an important lesson. No love is worth fighting for if it means sacrificing your safety and dignity. Listen to your intuition, value yourself, and never stay where someone is quietly trying to take you away, because you deserve a love without risk.